Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session on navigating CMMC and NIST framework. Thank you for joining the session. Before we start, let me introduce myself. I am Punam Shejale. I am the CISO and DPO for CTS Tech, which is an IT healthcare company, and I also head the risk and compliance functions. So I have overall 25 plus years of experience in the IT industry, and I have worked extensively on process definition, implementation, and auditing of various quality, security, privacy, and risk frameworks and standards, as well as various regulatory compliances. So let's dive in to what is it that I'll be covering today. Uh, Moving on to the agenda. So I'll be talking about what CMMC is all about, understanding the basics of the NIST framework. How are CMMC and NIST related to each other? What are some of the implementation best practices for implementing these standards? And how do we overcome the challenges which we may encounter during the implementation? Okay. So CMMC stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with CMMI, which is a quality standard, which is capability maturity model for generally for quality management systems. So this is again a maturity model for cybersecurity, and this has been brought out by Department of Defense for their contractors. It was brought out by US DoD as a way to have more control and visibility over their vendor and contractor security. They released the first version in January 2020. In fact, the CMMC2, the current version, the latest version, which sort of got finalized early this late last year, and Department of Defense is looking at implementing the certification requirements for all their contracts by 2028 in a phased implementation starting Q1 2025. So that's how this maturity model frame certification becomes really critical for direct vendors who are working with any Department of Defense contracts, or they're indirect, they are outsourcing some of them to another contractor, right? So for all of them, compliance to CMMC requirement becomes a mandatory ask if they want to continue business. Uh, so of course, how does it help a DoD, right? So DoD is benefited because it helps protect the sensitive information which the contractors may have access to. And what is the kind of sensitive information the DoD is talking about? It is talking about sensitive unclassified information, which the acronym is SUI. In cybersecurity, all of us are uh, very particular about creating a lot of acronyms. So this is one of the acronyms that I think anybody who is in cybersecurity or at least wants to work with Department of Defense should be familiar with. So moving on, let me try to tell what is sensitive classified information, which DoD wants to protect. So this sensitive unclassified information can be of two types, CUI and FCI, another two acronyms that we have got. CUI stands for Controlled Unclassified Information and FCI is Federal Contract Information. When we say federal contract information, it is any information which gets generated if you are working on any government contract to deliver a product or service, which may not be intended for public release, and it requires to be protected not as a top secret information, but as some adequate level of protection needs to be provided so that it does not impact government operations. So, which includes contracts, emails, notes, recordings, reports, charts, etc. This kind of information would come as federal contract information or FCI. When we are talking about CUI or controlled unclassified information, this is anything which is required to be protected or has controls with respect to how it can be shared according to some law or legal requirement or some government policies. Uh, this could be anything like any legal material, health documents, PHI or PII records, any intellectual property, any ARM related control documents, or any technical drawings, etc. So that would come under CUI, control unclassified information. Moving on. So now we understand what is SUI, that is sensitive unclassified information. So depending on what is the kind of information a contractor, a DoD contractor, and an organization will get access to or will process as part of the services will give to DoD, the maturity level compliance requirements are mandated. So we have three levels. In CMMC version 1, there were 5 levels. In CMMC 2, they have optimized it to 3 for ease of understanding and implementation. So level 1 is foundational, which is for FCI or federal contract information. And there are only 17 controls which needs to be implemented. Uh, and how you can assess, you can do an annual self-assessment, and the score can be submitted in the supplier performance risk database. And of course, the government can come and audit anytime. And if there are gaps, then the company is liable to under the False Claims Act. Then there is level 2, which is the advanced level. So again, it is where the company may be generating both FCI and CUI, and the assessment nature may vary. If there is no information which is critical to national security, an annual self-assessment may still be acceptable. But if it is critical to national security, then a third party assessor organization needs to be onboarded to do the audit and certification. Then level 3 is the highest and most stringent maturity requirement of the model, which is called expert, in which FCI and CUI will be there, which needs to be protected. And in addition to level 2 requirements, which is all 110 controls of NIST SP 800-171, additional controls from 800 NIST SP 800-172 also needs to be implemented, and the assessment and certification will be done by the DoD. So as you see, right, as we move from maturity level 1 to 3, the number of controls, the rigor of the control itself keeps on increasing. So when we are talking about level 1, the foundational, the focus is the basic cyber hygiene. Level 2, intermediate cyber hygiene, where we need to have formal cybersecurity practices, implement risk management processes, incident response plans, have training and awareness, etc. But if you see in the foundational, the expectation is to have simple controls such as patching, antivirus, updates, firewall, etc., etc. But they need not have a structured ISMS in place, although they would provide that as a guidance that it is a best practice. In level 3, which is the expert, it is focused on advanced progressive cyber hygiene. They expect multiple tools to be implemented, advanced technologies to be implemented to detect and respond to cyber threats, continuous monitoring and improvement on the practices. It has to be, cyber security measures have to be much more proactive than reactive, and of course protection against advanced persistent threats. All of this is what is expected at level 3 maturity. So the complexity and the rigor increases, and of course uh, the the time to achieve that maturity or even the certification, the cost, etc., all that will also go up. Moving on to the next slide. So, what is the significance of this standard or CMMC cybersecurity maturity model certification for cybersecurity? So, of course, as a mandate, it is required for DoD supply chain, the direct and indirect contractors, so that they have a consistent cybersecurity posture and reduce the risk to the sensitive information. It also helps the organization itself and overall across the corporate landscape to improve um, to increase the cybersecurity rigor and posture and reduce data breaches, etc., and reduce the risk in the supply chain for everyone. For and of course it helps the organization in enhancing its organizational resilience. So this was a brief about the CMMC uh, standard. Now moving on to the NIST CSF framework. So NIST CSF, NIST Cybersecurity Framework is another cybersecurity framework which can be adopted by organizations. So unlike CMMC, this is which is a mandate from the Department of DoD, and it is not a flexible. There's no flexibility given to the organization on what they want to implement or not implement. Based on applicability, they will need to go ahead and implement it. Here, based on it can be tailored. The NIST CSF, it can be tailored based on what is my requirement or the level of complexity of my business, the size of my business, the kind of data or kind of security posture that I want to maintain. It can be tailored, it is flexible and scalable. So NIST CSF is a base that organizations, not necessarily only DoD contractors, can use to help improve their cybersecurity posture and rigor. So it consists of, there are 6 core functions. The current version of NIST CSF is version 2. In the earlier version, which many of you may be familiar with, which had only 5 core functions of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. In the version 2, they have added additional function of govern, and all the NIST 800-171, if you see in CMMC, we saw all for level 2, all controls of NIST 800-171 are required to be compliant for maturity level 2 in CMMC. Here, NIST 800-171 is one of the various publications which are part of the framework. So it has a lot of flexibility based on what is the rigor that you want, and you can go ahead and implement those. So when we are looking at these 6 core functions of NIST CSF, there are 22 categories or categories or areas that which are covered here. So under govern, if you see, it talks about organizational context, the risks management strategy, roles, responsibilities, authorities, policy, oversight, and of course, given the various supply chain attacks, there is a rigor which needs to be brought in from a governance perspective. So there is a cybersecurity supply chain risk management. And if you observe, if you are familiar with the ISO standard structure, ISO standard also has a structure which talks about organization context, risk management, roles, policy, oversight. So if you see some of those, many of the global frameworks, best practices, they are sort of getting aligned on a similar structure. Of course, the intent and the controls may vary, but the structure is very similar. There is a lot of focus on governance and building that quality culture or cybersecurity culture within the organization, so that it is implemented not as a one time, and continuity and sensitivity on an ongoing basis, the rigor can be improved. Similarly, in identify, you have asset management, risk assessment, and improvement. Protect is, of course, how do you protect what is to be protected through identity management, authentication, and access control, awareness and training, data security, platform security, technology infrastructure, and resilience. So it's basically, if you see, it talks of people, process, and tools, technology deployment. Detection is through continuous monitoring and adverse event analysis. Response is through incident management, analysis, response reporting and communication, incident mitigation. Recover is incident recovery plan execution, recovery and communication. So this covers the whole life cycle of a cybersecurity event, even from identification till recovery, and of course the overall governance of the same. Moving on, how are they related? We talked about the relation between CMMC and NIST, right? So CMMC framework, it's a regulatory standard or a mandate which is there from Department of Defense. It imbibes controls and practices from various standards, primary being NIST SP 800-171, which is protected, controlled, unclassified information in non-federal systems and organizations. If it was a federal organizations, then of course NIST SP 853 would come in the picture. Then NIST Cybersecurity Framework, ISO 27001, which is the mother of all our security where we started from. Then FedRAMP, DFARS, which is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, the CIS controls, that is Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls, and CSS CSM, which is the Cloud Security Alliance Cloud Control Matrix. So primary controls are getting driven from the top 3 or 4 of these uh, standards into the CMMC framework. So that's how it becomes very relatable and interlinked. So, as we discussed, right, NIST provides foundational guidelines. It incorporates more or less many of the practices from NIST 800, 171 and NIST CSF practices. It also simplifies achieving our CMMC compliance through existing NIST adherence. So when we want to map the NIST and CMMC levels, so if you see what we saw earlier, the level 1 is targeting the basic cyber security hygiene, the foundational level, and it has 7 foundational cyber security practices only. Level 2 maps precisely to NIST 800, 171, all 110 controls, and it is for all those entities who are handling the controlled unclassified information. Level 3 exceeds NIST 800, 171, and it pulls additional stringent, there are more stringent controls in NIST SP 800, 172, which are leveraged. And this is for highly sensitive CUI, or they are fulfilling critical defense functions. So any questions? I'll just take a pause here. Anybody, any questions, please, you can put it in the chat if there are. Okay, let me move on. So how does it benefit? How do we benefit by combining NIST and CMMC? So of course, streamlining the compliance effort, it's easier to meet the CMMC requirements if NIST is already implemented or you are on your way there. NIST or any other cybersecurity standard, that culture of security is already there. It's easier to uh, add that rigor additionally than starting from scratch. And of course, the timeline accordingly will increase or decrease. Enhancing the security because it is getting leveraging both the frameworks, the NIST as well as addition CMMC's framework, which is taking practices or adopting practices from other frameworks which you may not have implemented directly. Then of course it is more efficient because it reduces duplication of effort. Because CMMC leverages NIST, if I have implemented most of the NIST requirements, and if I'm aiming for level 2, we are already there. So no additional extra work to be required. Of course, you may need to onboard a third party assessment organization, uh, but yeah, that would be the additional cost if that is applicable. Otherwise, self assessment should be sufficient. uh, so what are the benefits of CMMC and NIST compliance? So for organizations, it is strengthening their cybersecurity defense and posture and protecting them from cybersecurity threats and supply chain attacks. It is a competitive advantage in securing DoD contracts, as well as it shows the organization rigor even to non-DoD clients they may be wanting to work with, that they are compliant or have achieved a maturity level as per CMMC. And of course, it enhances their reputation and trust and credibility with their clients and partners that they are working with. For the DoD, Department of Defense, it is improved security across the supply chain. The data threats, data breaches, cyber espionage is what is getting reduced. And of course, they get assurance of consistent cybersecurity practices and maturity, general maturity across various organizations on their cybersecurity posture. So this is one of the ways that US DoD is trying to push the cybersecurity maturity, and making the organization adopt to some of these practices, and thus protecting all of us, as a trickle down effect. Yeah, moving on the implementation best practices. So how do I go ahead and go about implementing this if I already have implemented any one of the cybersecurity frameworks like NIST or ISO or any other standard, or or not, right? If there is nothing in place, of course, then also you need to do a self-assessment and a gap assessment to understand your current posture, uh, identify the required CMMC level for your contracts. So when you say identify the required CMMC level, depending on the kind of work that you expect to do directly with the DoD or indirectly with the DoD with your existing customers, then if it is a FCI or CUI, you will uh, need to accordingly implement those practices. Uh, and if applicable, then engage a third party assessment organization. And of course, the documentation of continuous monitoring, the evidences, records, etc., needs to be maintained. Now, just as if you look at the deliverables as per NIST requirements and as per um, CMMC requirements, if you look at CMMC, my bad, there's a typo here on the right side. It is as per CMMC requirements, key deliverables. So even when we are doing a self-assessment, of course, we need to identify my controlled unclassified information, what kind of information that we have, and are getting processed, where it is stored, how it is transmitted, who has access to that environment, we need to understand. And then accordingly, based on that, of course, the maturity level will get identified or mapped. And then the different policies, procedure updates needs to be done, which includes creating of a system security plan, incident reporting, updating of the various ISMS policies, then risk assessment and implementation as per the assessment of risk and maturity level, and the risk analysis and results from the various technical testing and scans that we may do. Training sessions for people to create awareness, which could be creating the content or leveraging some of the existing content from some of the cybersecurity training tools like know before is one of them. There are others which are around which can be leveraged, and of course you can create your own content which can be used for providing the training and conducting the awareness content. And then plan of action and milestone form for deficiency in any capabilities which may be identified. Now, if you look at the NIST requirements also, NIST 800-171, it talks about having a system security plan, a plan of action and milestones, a policies and standards, your SOPs, evidence and artifacts, compliance logs, tracking mechanisms, the diagrams, etc. So it's almost, if you have implemented NIST, you will already have many of those things in place. So the work effort gets reduced as we talked about it, and the duplication is less. So what are the typical challenges you would encounter, right? So there are top three challenges that you can think of, and all of us in the industry, in the cyber industry, we are constantly aware of that, is resource, budget, and cyber security uh, staffing constraints, right? So we would the budget related, we will need the business case given the economic situation, right? Have we build the business case and get provision and for the from the organization to invest in some of these, and of course the team itself, right? The capability of the existing team, you may not have adequate staff itself. So how do you overcome this challenge? So of course we need to identify what are the areas which are important and critical from achieving either a NIST compliance or a CMMC compliance, and to whatever maturity level that you think that you are targeting based on your control environment. You need to leverage whatever is there, existing tools, and implement it. And of course, there is a lot of external support guidance which is available, which can be leveraged also. So it's not that you have to do everything yourself. There are a lot of consultants outside who can provide that guidance and help you uh, upgrade your maturity posture and guide you towards achieving that. Then how do you, another question which keeps coming up is, how do I interpret these requirements which are being asked by CMMC and NIST? So for CMMC and NIST themselves have come out with lot of guides and documentation which is freely available on their portal. You can leverage that. Um, and of course, attending training sessions, consult the workshop experts, and of course now with chat gpt and gen ai, you can leverage that also to generate and ask away, and you will get really good responses, or at least understanding of some of these requirements, and it's life has become easier, I believe now. uh, Maintaining, another area is, how do you maintain compliance and monitoring? The best way is to implement certain tools which help you to do that, bring that rigor rather than depending on manual monitoring and intervention, which is costly. There might be misses, etc. So always much more cost effective and efficient to implement automated monitoring tools. Regularly review and update cybersecurity policies, and staying current and informed about changes in CMMC or NIST requirements which may be there. Yeah, any questions, anyone? So overall, yeah. So I'm done. So we have talked about in today's slide about, uh, yeah, Deepika, you're typing your question. Any questions you have, or you can ask any questions. Okay, so Deepika's question is, how can one initiate the implementation in organization? So, so of course you need to. I'm not sure of the context of your organizations, but having a base implementation, any standard, right? So what is it? If it is CMMC, you need to understand it is level 1, level 2, or level 3 maturity you are aiming for, and against that, whatever is the applicable controls in your organization context with a gap assessment is what you would do. So for, let me just go back to that slide that I was talking about. So conducting a self-assessment against those controls, where you stand, your organization stands against those, and if there are gaps, then work on closing those gaps. That's how you, I would suggest you initiate it, and of course, getting a management buy-in to get that project rolling. Uh, Rolling would be what would be the first trigger point, because then you have their support to proceed and move ahead with some investments which may be required in tools and technology, or any additional budget. Does that help, Deepika? Yeah, thank you. So if there are no questions, I'm done, or any other questions, I'm here available. You can ping me on this portal or separately, and we can connect and discuss. Yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for being so patient and being available for the session.